scenario, you can technically carry, you
Yeah,
know. So, and I think also in terms of walking, I think in one of the books of New Testament Acts, it says the disciples they walked the Shabbat day journey. So, what is the Shabbat day journey? Exact.
exactly. Where did the disciples get that law from? A Sabbath
Right.
day journey.
The oral Torah.
What is a Sabbath day journey? Right? It's not just like, oh, they walk this part, and we'll just call it a Sabbath day journey just to make it. Yeah, they're actually following a halakha,
Right.
right? So carrying is forbidden in from one domain to another domain. So I talked about Rishus Hayachid, which is a private domain, Rishus Harabim, public domain, right? So you can't carry from a private domain into a public domain for certain uh, steps, measurement, right? So first of all, where is carrying forbidden in the Torah? Some will say you're crazy. What are you talking about? You're allowed to carry on Shabbat. Where it doesn't say that in the Torah. Where does it say this in the Torah?
I think it talks about where the Mishkan, when they were working on the Mishkan, that's the time when the instructions are given. So basically, the 39 Malakot, everything comes from the Mishkan, the kind of work they did, right?
Absolutely. And what would they do? They would carry from one domain to another domain. They would literally bring logs on wagons from a public domain and bring it to the Mishkan to build the Mishkan. They would be entering in a private domain. You see, this is actually being built on in the Torah. There was 39 forms of work they did in the Mishkan. So these 39 forms of work are prohibited on Shabbat. But what if I told you even Yirmiyahu explains about this, about carrying, how it's forbidden? Yirmiyahu chapter 17, verse 21. Some people I'll put on Facebook, you're not allowed to do this in one area to another area, carrying. And then you get these Messianics or Hebrew roots telling me I'm crazy. Oh, you're really bound by the law. You're making up your own traditions, these things. It says to keep Shabbat holy, but it doesn't explain how in the Torah. But what if I'm actually not making this up? What if the rabbis aren't actually making this up? What if they're actually building off of something in the Torah? Yirmiyahu 17:21 states explicitly that in the Beis Hamikdash could not have been destroyed if the laws of Hotza'ah, carrying, would have been properly adhered to. The following passage is of the words of the Navi. So says Hashem, guard your souls and do not carry a load on the Shabbos day to bring it to the gates of Jerusalem. You shall not bring a load from your houses on the Shabbos day. You shall desist from all labor. You shall sanctify the Shabbos day as I commanded your forefathers. And if you hearken to me and not bring a load within the gates of the city on the day of Shabbos to sanctify the Shabbos day by not doing labor, Malacha, this city will be settled forever. But if they will not heed me to sanctify the Shabbos day by not carrying any load to the gates of Yerushalayim, I will kindle a fire at its gates that will consume the palaces of Yerushalayim, never to be extinguished. Hey, see that? Are the rabbis making something up? Is Yirmiyahu making up a new law? Learn this from Torah Shel Pei. No, right?
You're repeating what's in the Torah.
So you have Rishus Hayachid, Rishus Harabim, and we have what's called the Carmelis, another domain.
I remember right, the Mishkan consists of two domains. The outer court is the public domain, and the Ohel Moed is the private.
Actually, what is the public domain? The actual Mishkan, the whole Mishkan is a private domain. But what was, according to Torah, what is considered the public domain? So
Outside the
what?
court.
But there's actually a way to determine a public domain. So if you go outside, out of your house, is that considered necessarily a public domain? According to halakha, not really.
No.
So what considers a public domain, and what did they consider the public domain in the times of the wilderness, in the Mishkan? Well, what was the public domain in the wilderness? It was...
Well, what was it that they dwelled in around the Mishkan? They dwelled in
Apáguelo. Siente mucha calor abajo. Abajo la tenía prendida y le di
Okay, good night, Linda. Somebody's having a whole other study going on here right now. Okay, so the public domain is the wilderness is a big area, except that's not really the public domain. The Rambam says what classifies the public domain? The 600,000 children of Israel were coming through the wilderness. As they were traveling in the wilderness, this is the public domain. The public domain is the traffic of 600,000 people. A public domain is when you have 600,000 people. So let's say I go outside and I have the street where you don't see too much traffic going on. It's not really considered a public domain. A public domain is more considered like let's say you have a very heavy flow highway in front of your house, and it's about that width, maybe a little bit more. I'm not getting very specific here, just giving you general details here. And that highway has heavy traffic. That is considered basically a public domain.
Right.
But now in the wilderness today, you don't have 600,000 people flowing in the in the wilderness and everything. So that the wilderness today, because halakha changes and times change, now the wilderness is considered not a public domain, right? So basically there's 4 types of domains, and from carrying to one to the next is forbidden. And as we go on, maybe through the Shabbats, I will begin to explain more about these domains and what is considered forbidden and what is considered patur or mutar, right? What is allowed. And this is a huge entire study on itself. I'm not even an expert on it. I just been studying it, and I can read along in the Mishnah and what the sages say, right? But my point is that it all comes from the Torah. It's hidden in the Torah. The prophets say much about this. The prophets are not adding new commandments. They're not saying new things. They're building off of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. They're actually stating the halakha. Right? And so that's just a bit about the oral Torah. I thought it would be a good thing to discuss.
Yeah.
In
Are we
fact-
jumping into the Torah portion?
Yeah, about to do that now. So, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is also because we're talking about muksa. And even in Pesachim 47b, it says when someone uses a non-designated item on Shabbos, he is in effect designating it on Shabbat. And this is actually Pesachim 47b says it's biblically forbidden. Most rabbis will, or the sages will say, Muksa is oral Torah, but even the Pesachim 47b says it's actually biblically forbidden, and we get it from this parsha about carrying the manna and these things. Also, when they were building on the Mishkan, Moshe would tell Israel to stop carrying on Shabbat, literally in the Torah. These kind of things, right? And muksa is items that are forbidden to be used on Shabbat, like money, right?
What about when Yeshua in John chapter 5 told that the man that healed to get up and walk and take up his mat?
Right. That's a big one. And the anti-missionaries love to prey on that one. But historically, it's actually believed that where the man was with his mat was in actually one of these domains where he was allowed to pick up and carry in the temple. If you look at where he was in, historians actually explain the setting and where it was, and he was actually allowed to pick up the mat. Also, there is halakha if one is injured and there's certain things about a mat if a person is like handicapped and needs this.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's believed that he was in one of these domains.
All right, okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
it's hard to prove because we don't really see what setting it is literally in the Gospels. But historians have looked around, kind of went in depth of where they were in the scenery. I don't have that in front of me, so I can't explain it well right now. But it's believed that this was one of the domains that he was permitted to carry. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I posted from this, I believe it was yesterday, about the inner dimension of this Holocaust, where Nachmanides disagrees with the Rambam about the distance.
Oh, yeah.
But the Torah does place a prohibition, and the rabbis are using this as a means of offense to guard against the violation of a Torah commandment. That is, you're not allowed to carry anything from a private domain to a public and vice versa.
Yeah. And it was interesting. You mentioned about the 10 tefachim high and the measurement. I think it's like I'm trying to remember now, 4 by 4, whatever, cubits or whatever. Anyways, there's a certain measurement that if you come into a Rishus Hayachid, into a Rishus Harabim, public domain, you're allowed to carry within a certain measurement, but then you have to stop and put it down.
Yeah,
then you're allowed to pick it up and walk again. But that measurement and with the height and everything actually equals out to the name of Hashem. Also, all the
rabbis say it's 1 mil or 1.2 kilometers in our day.
Oh, for the distance of traveling on a Shabbos day journey.
But see, the Rambam uses a figure that's 12 times that number. But then Nachmanides disagrees with that number. And the rabbis concur and bring the figure back to 1.2 or 1 mil.
Yeah, I think it's a dispute about like a bit of outside the city and within the city, this just little details here.
But the Torah imposes restrictions of movement on the Sabbath, either on man or on his belongings or on both.
Right. I don't know if this is going over some people's heads right now, but
I would get into the inner dimension of this because I posted about it because I was studying this.
Yeah.
The Kabbalistic implications are staggering.
Absolutely. It actually helped me love halakha more when I read that in Shlach HaKodesh. Amazing what he says. It's absolutely. You think the rabbis are making these measurements out of nothing, but it actually
they're not
has
making
to do
stuff up.
It's with an esoteric meaning, all of it. And the malakah, the 39 malakah are all about malakah. Work in Hebrew doesn't really mean like work as in an occupation or job. It means to create. So what are you actually creating with carrying or into a domain to another domain? And I think it's Rav Hook. I think it's him that says you're literally creating a new energy when you go into another domain into another one. It has to do with creation as well, But
he also talks about the distance of the encampment of the Jewish people which is the public domain.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I thought about the Shekinah, the cloud overhead by day and the pillar of fire by night, and the height.
Yeah.
Was it 10 tefachim or greater? If it was greater, then it would still be a public domain because of the distance of the Jewish encampment around the Mishkan.
Yeah, the Mishkan was definitely a private domain, right? But yeah, we'll stop there with the halakha because yeah, I don't want to get over my head here. But now we'll go to the Parsha here. So we're in Parshas Beshalach. But yeah, like I want to start talking more about halakha. I think it's good for us to learn all aspects,
I mean, I bring this up because this is in relation to this week's Parsha.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's the whole reason why. Yeah, I
But
kind
I'm
of
not going
went
to get
there.
into Kabbalah because this will definitely be over some people's pay grade.
Okay, yeah. But if you have something awesome to share where it's good, share it whenever, So anyways,
Can
in
I ask you, didn't you say there are 3 domains?
4 domains.
I mean,
Well, yeah,
4.
where are the other 2?
What
There's
are the other 2?
Oh, sorry. I thought I said one is Carmelis and what is it called? Makom Patur, I think it's called. And I don't want to get in the explanations because it's very technical, but maybe next Shabbat I'll talk about it. I don't want to go off of memory of saying certain things wrong, but basically, Carmelis on a slight definition is like it's kind of an in between a private and public domain, and Makom Patur. I could be reversing this. This is why I don't want to. Just don't take my absolute word on it. Makom Patur is like it's a tiny. It's like I think it's a island. I don't know if it's Carmelis or Makom Patur. I gotta review. I need to review my study. But Makom Patur is basically like an island within like a step up in between like a private domain, a public domain, and then you have like an island on its own where it's like this other space that's just it's not really considered a public domain. It's not considered a private domain. You have this, it's like basically like a phone booth. A phone booth is not really a private domain because it doesn't have the measurements of a private domain. It's its own domain.
Right? It sounds like a neutral area.
Yeah, so there's a whole halakha in all of this. I could be mistaken. It could be the other way around, Carmelis. So just stating that I'm not an expert in halakha, I'm studying it, but you really want to know, go to the real rabbis, so but I will maybe next Shabbat I will discuss the 4 domains. I'll give you the actual definitions because thank God I have the books here that explain it word for word for me, right?
Whoa.
It's learning. I'm learning too. I want to learn how to keep Shabbat better. Even if we don't hold, or it's too hard for us to hold, especially those that are still learning even just about Shabbat for the first time in these kind of things, it's good to learn though. It's very important. Okay, so anyway, we're in Parshas Beshalach, which is Shemot, Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. Okay. And it starts off, Vayhi beshalach paro et ha'am. It happened when Paro sent out the people that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistine because it was near. It says ki karov, because it was near. For God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war and they will return to Mitzrayim, Egypt. And it says actually Mitzrayma. Okay. And so, and carrying on in verse 18, it says, Vaya save Elokim es ha'am derech hamidbar yom suf v'chamushim alu b'nei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim. So God turned the people toward the way of the wilderness to the sea of reeds. The children of Israel were armed, which is the word here, v'chamushim. They were armed when they went up from Egypt. And it says, Vayichach Moshe es atzmot Yosef imo ki hashve'a hishiva es b'nei Israel le'amor pakod yifchod Elohim etchem v'ha'aletzem es atzmotzai mitzeh et itechem. Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had firmly adjured the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you will surely bring up my bones from here with you. Right? So what type of war would make them want to turn back? What type of war would make them want to turn back? See, Israel just escaped Egypt. They're on their way to freedom, redemption, and it talks about perhaps they will go to war. The Zohar says this is not a war of flesh and blood, but spiritual. It's a spiritual warfare, right? The Jews did not fear war, but they feared the wilderness. They feared the wilderness. And it says because it was close, Ki Karov. Look at Exodus. If we go to Exodus chapter 16 for a second here. Verse 2 and 3. It says the entire assembly of the children of Israel complained against Moshe and Aaron in the wilderness. The children of Israel said to them, if only we had died by the hand of Hashem in the land of Mitzrayim, as we sat by the pot of meat and we ate bread to satiety. For you have taken us out to this wilderness to kill this entire congregation by the famine. They're complaining about the wilderness. If the concern was sending them out and then bumping into the Plishtim, then why are we told they were armed? And the Or HaChaim says they were armed and they would not turn back, but they wanted to go to the physical, they wanted to go to and have physical material needs. They had the desire to return. They actually enjoyed what they had in Mitzrayim. You know, with everything going on in the world right now, we're in a state of Egypt where there's slavery going on. And I explained to my son, he wants a super breakfast every morning, cheese and waffles. It's got to be made his way. He's got to have it all. He's got to have the greatest meal. And 2 hours later, he's hungry again. And I said, listen, what are you going to do? You always want to snack on chips and these things. What are you going to do if the world were in bigger trouble? What if the world, the food shortage was getting worse? Or what if you had big restrictions to go in a store and dad doesn't want to? What if you have to eat maybe 1 or 2 meals a day? Will you be able to do it? Or will you run to the store and do whatever the government tells you to do just so you can get your super breakfast, right? and you know, this is the way Israel was looking at it. You know, I know we were slaves in Israel, but we had steak. Not really, but they had good food. They had good food, right? They weren't living so bad. I mean, yeah, they were slaves. They were working hard, but they were getting free food. We see this as the Torah goes on, how they even talk about the food they had in Mitzrayim, right?
See the parallel with today, though? How everyone wants the government to provide for their every need.
Yeah, it's true.
And
Even
that's
I said
exactly
it.
what's happening right now.
I said it today. I said it, if the government's willing to pay me, then I'll take it. At least I get to study Torah. But at least my mind is studying Torah and not.
That's my thought too. It's like, I'm here teaching my wife Torah, which is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, they're taking my job away. Okay, pay me to study Torah, then Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, there's a spot in the Gospels where Yeshua says, "Make friends with the unrighteous mammon."
Oh yeah, Baruch Hashem, yeah.
So, I mean, you have to unpack that one, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, Israel had a desire to return. So why did Pharaoh, he sent out the people? Look at verse 17 again. It says it happened when Pharaoh, he sent out the people and not God. It says Pharaoh sent them out. And look at the language here. It says Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am, the people, right? But in chapter 14, it says Bnei Israel. You see, sometimes they're called Bnei Israel. Sometimes they're called the people. This is not a coincidence in Torah.
It's called the Erev Rav and the people of Israel, right?
Yeah, the Or HaChaim says this refers to the Erev Rav, the people, not Israel, the mixed multitude, the Egyptians that came out with Israel. Whenever the word Ha'am is there, it's used as referring to the Egyptians, the Erev Rav. Some people disagree, but I don't take anything really coincidental in Torah. When every word is mentioned, just like Jacob or Israel, these things, I take it very seriously, that there's a message with each word being used for a purpose. Right?
I could bring the Ari about that one because I've been studying about that too, man.
Bring the RE. I don't mind.
Let's see here. All that's in Parashas Shemot. It lays the groundwork for all the Parshas that come after. I gotta get over there. Generation of this. No, yeah. See, the mixed multitude. Know that there were two levels. There were souls that were completely rectified, and they reincarnated into the Jewish people. In the generation after they descended to Egypt, this is big, dude. Seriously. And there were souls that were not rectified. These are the ones you got to watch out for.
The Chaim.
And they reincarnated into the Egyptians, those whom Joseph had circumcised, as it says. Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you to do.
Amazing.
Shemos 41:55. Thus it says, he said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel. Remember that phrase, the people of the children of Israel. Shemot 1:9. After that, they were disgusted because the children of Israel, Shemot 1:12, without mentioning people. This question, if asked in Sefer HaZohar and Parashas Shemos, this is the matter, is this. Joseph decreed circumcision on those Egyptians as mentioned. Yaakov, his father, our rabbis of blessed memory say, also made converts in Egypt, and they were the level of the aforementioned souls. These people did not associate with the rest of the Egyptians, and they accustomed themselves in their cities like the children of Israel, as it says, and he transferred the people to the cities. Bereshit 47:21.
Nice.
Which were the converts who fulfilled the commandment of circumcision. They set them apart as unique cities, and they were recognizable different from the rest of the Egyptians and did not mix with them. Pharaoh recognized these two levels, and with respect to the converts, he said, behold, The people of the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we, and they were the level of the mixed multitude that left with the Jewish people, and they were many more than the Jewish people, as our rabbis of blessed memory say. They are the people of the children of Israel, and not the children of Israel themselves. Unlike the Jewish people, they were more numerous and stronger than the rest of the Egyptians. The people of Pharaoh, as known from the verse, he took 600 select chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, with officers over them all. Shemot 14:7. Thus were 30 Egyptians for every Jew. With respect to the Jewish people themselves,
Wow.
they were disgusted because the children of Israel, Shemot 1:12, but not because of the people of the children of Israel, because the main hatred was for the children of Israel. They were the main ones, and therefore it says, come, let us deal wisely with them, Shemot 1:10, with the Jewish people themselves. In this manner, we will cancel out the converts called the people of the children of Israel. We have explained the reason for the oppression and exile of the Jewish people of that generation and why it had to be in Egypt with the various different oppressions and decrees. And Sefer HaZohar Parashas Kitisa on the verse, like a rose among thorns, Sher Hasharim 2:2. There is a great hint to what we have explained.
Oh yeah, you went to Mach 10 with that. That's very good.
Yeah, but see, there it is,
Yeah, very good.
You have the Arab Rab within the people of the children of Israel.
Exactly. And 30-1, that's pretty crazy. And when it says in the beginning of the Parsha, it says, Vayhi, and it happened. This is associated with suffering, painful. Paro suffered the plague of the firstborn. And if you look at Exodus 14, verse 10, it says, Paro approached the children of Israel, Paro approached, the children of Israel raised their eyes, and behold, it says, Egypt was journeying after them, and they were frightened. Wait a minute. It says, Egypt was chasing after them. And in 14, verse 12, chapter 14, verse 12, is this not the statement that we made to you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve Egypt? For it is better that we should serve Egypt than we should die in the wilderness. There's something wrong with the language here. Does anybody notice the grammar going on here? It says Egypt was journeying after them. It says it was better that we should serve Egypt. What is Egypt? Egypt is a place.
Right.
How can a place chase after you? It should say the Egyptians was journeying after them. It should say, well, it was better when we were serving the Egyptians. What's going on? The Malbim says defeating the Egyptian army would require a supernatural courage and boldness, the way of divine assistance. What was really chasing after them? Not the Egyptians, the Yetzirah. Egypt, the Satan. It's singular, it should be plural. They said it's better for us to serve the Satan, it's better to serve ourselves than die in the wilderness. Guess what they were lacking? They were lacking Emunah. They had no faith in Hashem. But Hashem, with his divine assistance, provided a supernatural flow of courage to one who is already courageous of heart, but not to one who is totally lacking courage. For the reason Hashem prohibited the Jews from entering the land of the Philistines, what was Israel armed with? Israel was spiritually armed in a way, but the Ramban actually says, but it says that they cried out to Hashem, but some of the opinions were, but it was a negative cry. It wasn't really crying out for help. It was crying out as complaining to Hashem. But then there's some views that say they were crying out in prayer. They were crying out to prayer to Hashem. So which one was it? Ramban says, like every Jew has different opinions. Every Jew doesn't agree. He was saying these were groups within the people. Some were crying out with Amunah. Some were crying out and complaining against Hashem. Not everybody was really one accord. Right? Some were lacking courage. But some were spiritually armed. Rashi says they had thoughts on going back to worshiping idols. Rashi says this, that they actually were considering going back to worshiping idols. And this was a war within them. Why does it say Egypt was chasing after them? So if we go to Rashi in the commentary in chapter 14, verse 10, it says, Rashi says, and behold, Egypt was journeying after them. This indicates that the Israelites saw the ministering angel of Egypt traveling from the heavens to aid Egypt. This Rashi says this. And it says, Hashem says, perhaps the people will reconsider, or the Chazam Cipher, he comments on this. When it says perhaps they will reconsider, it says the term, when it says reconsider here, let me go back to the word here, reconsider. It says Yinachem ha'am. Perhaps the people will reconsider. Yinachem, to consider, connotes regretting the past. This is what Chazam Cipher says. Nothing could be more unforgivable than to regret participating in Judaism's greatest moment, the Exodus. In fact, they had voiced such regrets. Bnei Israel would no longer have deserved their freedom and would have been enslaved again. This is what Chazam Cipher says. A spiritual mindset to return. Hashem says, I can't let that happen. And so it says they came up armed. 1 out of 5 Jews came out, the rabbis say. And some even go on to 1 out of every 500, 1 out of 5,000, right? The Ramchal, he says the word chamushim for armed is missing a vav. And chamushim may therefore be read as chamishim, meaning 50, a reference to the 50 gates of understanding. And we're going to your level now, Rick. So it says, Ramchal says we can find support from this, from the Torah, describing Bnei Israel as went up from the land of Mitzrayim, or from Egypt, rather than went out of the land of Egypt. They went up from the land of Egypt rather than went out of the land of Egypt. They were elevated to a high spiritual level, rising above the Tumah of Egypt. They began spiritually ascending these 50 gates of understanding and reached the climax 50 days later at Har Sinai when they received the Torah. Okay? The Jews were spiritually elevated. They were ascending. The 50 gate of understanding elevated. The Zohar says Israel coming out of Egypt was a spiritual matter being transformed. 1/5 still was spiritually weak. They were still blemished though. Hashem had to take them another way. Look at Shemot chapter 13, verse 19. Moshe took the bones Atzmot Yosef Imo of Joseph with him. For he had made the children of Israel swear, saying, God will surely remember you, and you will shall surely bring my bones up here with you. Joseph's bones. Why Moshe? Why did Moshe take the bones? It should have been Joseph's descendants that took the bones. Joseph was talking to his brothers, right? And Chazam Sofer says, when Moshe was really the only one worthy to do this, he was the only one worthy to take Joseph's bones. He says here, and he says that Rashi also cites that 4/5 of the Jewish people perished during the days of darkness in Egypt, just as the rebellious son dies as a comparative youngster rather than later as a culpable adult. Those somewhat immoral segments of the Jewish people perished during the plague of darkness rather than as the full-fledged sinners at the time. So you were even quoting the RE, right, Rick, about them being from Egypt earlier, the era of Rav. And this is why they actually had a chance, because they died at an early stage. There's actually a command in the Torah about a rebellious son to stone him to death, really, because before he eats the age of a full potential wickedness. So this is actually allowing a chance for the Egyptians to come out of that impurity.
Yeah, the Ari writes about the verse you just quoted. You already know what our rabbis of blessed memory has said on the verse. Go to Yosef and do whatever he tells you to do. Bereshit 41:55. That he decreed they should perform Milah. He converted and circumcised them, and this was the mixed multitude that left Egypt with the Jewish people. Moshe also wanted to bring them under the wings of the divine providence. And since Yosef began this mitzvah and was the main one who converted them, Moshe took them with him.
And Yosef, you spoke about, right? Why did Moshe was the only one who carried the bones of Yosef, right? And I think Hashem also decreed, gave a law to the Jewish people, asking them to, get the gold and the silver, get all the jewelry and everything. So the people were busy collecting the jewelry from the people, right, from the Egyptians.
Yeah, they were also still on this low level, caring about the physical, where Moshe was caring about the spiritual. I'm going to explain a bit more why he took the bones. But even the Zohar says 1/50th came out. And this was a very small group. And more than a physical departure, the Exodus constituted a radical spiritual transformation from the 49th gate of defilement to the highest level of sanctity. And Bnei Israel from the dregs of immorality from the 50th level of sanctity. And so the Chazam Cipher actually says here, the Ramchal, he says that when Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, Chazal teaches that while all Bnei Israel, like we were saying, grabbed all of the jewelry or whatever, the gold and silver, Moshe grabbed onto the mitzvah instead. And he says, as the nation was leaving Mitzrayim, Moshe covered the bones of Yosef and took them with him. Why was it specifically Moshe who transported the bones of Yosef? After all, the patriarch of each tribe instructed his members to transport his bones upon leaving Egypt. If so, the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim should have been the ones that transported Joseph's bones, not Moshe, who was a member of the tribe of Levi. There are two possible reasons why Moshe took Joseph's bones. Firstly, Joseph was the only son of Yaakov who was divided into two tribes. An argument may have possibly ensued over who would merit taking the patriarch Joseph's bones. And so given that it would be demeaning to divide Joseph's bones and allow each to take a portion, an alternative solution was needed. To prevent any quarreling, Moshe took the bones himself. Certainly there would be no objection, for it was a tremendous honor for Joseph's bones to be transported by one as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. On
I
a
never heard
deeper,
that.
yeah, and he goes on. He goes
Awesome.
on a deeper level. Moshe's spiritual potential to be realized, he would need to draw on the strength and Mida of Yosef. To accomplish this, Moshe transported Joseph's bones himself from Egypt. Now, a lot of people debate about, is Mashiach greater than Moshe? No, Mashiach can't be greater. And I call this is how I actually explain that, in my opinion, Mashiach is greater. And it's called, to me, this is called the snowball effect. It says that Moshe even latched onto the Mida of Yosef, that kind of like spiritually elevated him more. And as the prophets continue after the death of Moshe, it goes to Aaron. It says that Moshe put his hands on Aaron and he transmitted everything. And as the prophets go on, it's almost like they're piggybacking this essence from each before, and it's really not the that they're greater, because they're actually all from the same source. But the reason why I say Mashiach is greater is not because he's like spiritually all that bigger. It's about the time and the events of the time, that circumstances, the tikkun that is done in that time. That's why Yeshua says the time is now. Just like when Moshe gets to Mount Sinai, now it was the time for the Jews to receive Torah. It's all about the time and the process. And I call it, I don't know, I've never heard a sage call it a snowball effect, but that's how I explain it. It's like a snowball getting bigger and bigger of the holiness, I guess you could say.
Mashiach is greater in terms of the spiritual level. He attains the level of Yakidah, right? I don't think even Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't attain that level, right? So in that way, Mashiach is, right? And eventually, we don't know if Moshe is the same guy, right? Joseph.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into all that, but
yeah, the Ari writes about again, he writes so much about Parashas Shemot that I'm still going through it, but he has a section about the pre-Sinai rectification. And if you take Yeshua's discourse on the Mount and you overlay with the Ari, I think you'll find all the rectification you need to see in both those. Because that's what Yeshua was doing. That was, in a sense, the Sinai of his day, but not the way the pre-Sinai rectification that the Ari describes, because between the two, the mixed multitude.
Alfonsos, Al, what's going on? Shabbat Shalom. Thought I'd just say I just saw you there.
Hello, Shabbat Shalom.
How you doing, man? Don't be a stranger, bro. Okay, so carrying on, Exodus. So Moshe takes the bones. Really, what was Moshe doing? He was actually attaching himself to Mashiach. He was attaching himself to Mashiach, attaching himself. The Yom Suf. Yom Suf means the end of the day. If we look at Exodus verse 14, verse 5, it says, it was told to the king of Egypt, the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants became transformed, and the people they said, this is what we have done, that we have sent away Israel from serving us. So it says the king of Egypt. Behold, Egypt was journeying, 14 verse 5. And it says, look what it says. It says that the people had fled. You go to Psalm 114. Psalm 114. Let me go here for a minute. It says in Psalm 114, when Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech, Judah became his holy one. Israel is dominion. The sea saw them and fled. And in verse 5, it says, what alarmed you, O sea, that you fled? You see, fleeing. It says Israel, the Egyptians, it says, was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled. And when we go back to Joseph, who was tempted by Potiphar's wife, she grabbed his garment and fled. The same word back in Parashas 39, chapter 39, verse 12. It actually says here, she caught hold of him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and he fled. You know, this is kind of the merit of Joseph, that even the sea fled, that even Israel was able to flee because of the merit of Joseph. And this is another reason why Moshe had to take Joseph's bones with him. Because of Mida Keneged Mida, because of the merit of Joseph fleeing, help Israel be able to flee by a righteous Zadik. The Midrash teaches the Yam Suf fled when it saw the bones of Joseph. And after Joseph fled from Potiphar's wife, this is when he became Joseph the Hatzedek. And Proverbs 10:25 says the righteous is the foundation, the yesod of the world. Because Joseph rose over his emotions. Hashem rewarded Joseph by having the sea flee. Moshiach spoke to the storm and it was calm. And it was done by the strong hand of Hashem. Yad Chazak 144 is the gematria. 144.
Yeah, the Torah also says that
Crazy,
when
man.
Israel descended into Egypt, it was one soul. Nefesh Echad.
So what is this really all about? Spiritual warfare. Mitzrayim is trying to pull us away from Hashem. And what do we have to do when it says the king of Egypt? Look at that. Look at verse 14, verse 5 again. It was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants became transformed. Why doesn't it just say it was told Pharaoh? It was told to Pharaoh that the people fled and his heart and his servants became hard. Why does it go into, it was told the king of Egypt and Pharaoh and his heart? It's like extra words that were unnecessary. It was the king of Egypt was the Yetzirah, the spiritual force behind Pharaoh. And that's what made Pharaoh's heart go hard. The Yetzirah within him rising, saying you have to get them back. When it says Pharaoh sent out the people, Ha'am, he was sending out his minions. He was sending out the Egyptians to try to bring them back to Mitzrayim. And so we're in a spiritual war. We have to cling on to Mashiach. We have to cling on to Mashiach, hold on to Mashiach, and flee from, what does the Brit Hadashah say? Flee from the devil, flee from the Hasatan.
Yeah, the Hebrew, it says Levav Paro.
We have to run, yeah.
He said Yeharah took over,
Yes.
and then he pursued them and his servants.
Yep.
I think what happens is because Moshe says that we want to go and offer sacrifice, so he sends the Pharaoh sends some spies along with them, with Moshe and so then the Israelites, they're trying to hide somewhere, and that's how the spies goes and tells to Pharaoh, and he comes with the army. So if you look at the Passover, we celebrate the 7 days is on the time we tried to fled and the time we came to the Red Sea, we crossed the Red Sea.